our movement mechanics class, first year of personal fitness training program. Alright, so I'm going to start with the elevation of the scapula doing shrug, and then depression of the scapula, which is in the sagittal plane, medial lateral axis. Moving on to frontal raises, you're going to flex the shoulder, and then you're going to extend the shoulder. That is also in the sagittal plane, medial lateral axis. Moving on to the lateral raises, you're going to abduct the shoulder, and then you're going to adduct the shoulder coming down, closer to the midline. That is in the frontal plane, anterior posterior axis. Still with lateral raises, I'm going to supinate the wrist, and then I'm going to horizontally adduct towards the midline, and then horizontally abduct away from the midline. As I'm doing that, as I adduct horizontally, the scapula is rotating upward. As I go back, abducting horizontally, it is doing a downward rotation of the scapula. That is in the transverse plane at the longitudinal axis. Moving into the lumbar spine movements, I'm going to flex and extend in the sagittal plane on the medial lateral axis. As I go up, I flex the spine, or the lumbar spine. As I go down, I'm extending the lumbar spine. Flex, extend. Moving on to the frontal plane in the anterior posterior axis, I'm going to laterally flex away from the midline, extend to come straight back at the midline, laterally flex away from the midline, extend to go back to the midline. As I go back into the sagittal plane and flex the lumbar spine, I'm going to rotate unilaterally across the midline, this elbow to the opposite knee, go back down, which is extending, and then I'm going to flex the sagittal plane, turning into the transverse plane as I unilaterally rotate across the midline. The transverse plane is also, that's the transverse plane on the longitudinal axis. In the sagittal plane, I'm going to do a squat, which involves the hips and the knees. As I go down, I'm flexing the hip and the knees, so it's flexion. As I come up, that's extending of the knees and the hip. Sagittal plane, medial lateral axis. As I move into hip adduction, that's in the frontal plane, anterior posterior axis, going away from the midline. I'm going to abduct the hip. Coming back towards the midline, I'm adducting the hip. As I externally rotate the hip, the knee naturally follows, and that turns into the transverse plane at a longitudinal axis, and I can still abduct and adduct. And then as I internally rotate the hip, the knee also naturally follows. I can still abduct and adduct, which is still the transverse plane, longitudinal axis. Yay!